Hello everybody, welcome to this talk on student perceptions of teacher emoticon usage and assignment feedback and online teaching environments. Welcome, my name is Sophia Vanttinen-Newton and I am an IFP EAP coordinator currently at the University of Bristol. So in this paper, I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes about some recent research that I completed last May. So just as we'd gone into lockdown, this was part of an MA in Applied Linguistics at the University of Birmingham and was born out of my fascination with emoticons. So I did the JET programme about 15 years ago and had a plethora of emoticons, emoji, memoji on my Japanese keitai at the time. And since then I've been really interested in how emoticons have come more and more into computer mediated communication. And my thinking with this dissertation was how we could apply and use emoticons, getting students to engage with assignment feedback. So this paper is divided into two parts. So the first part will focus on student perceptions of teacher emoticon usage and assignment feedback. So the actual research study that I performed and the different subsections you can see there. And the second part of the talk will focus on use of emojis in an online teaching environment. So thinking about takeaway ideas for us as instructors to use in the online classroom. Let's look at the following pictures I've got on the screen in front of you. So on the top layer we have an emoticon, which is a set of punctuation marks. So Scott Foreman created the first smiley emoticon back in 1982 at Carnegie Mellon University. Then this later was followed by the emoji. So these are the pictograms in the middle layer. And then the picture at the bottom is a memoji, so that is a graphical depiction of somebody's identity online. Sometimes memoji and avatar can be used interchangeably, but memoji means like literally a me emoji, so showing a picture of oneself. So emojis are common paralinguistic tools in non-verbal communication. So we've seen them emerge more and more in this area. They're multifunctional and they're polysemic in nature. So they have multi-meanings. So looking at the literature, Markman and Oshima, 2007, Amma globally in 2012, identified the function of emojis, emoticons, to be a form of punctuation in the formation of sentences. So they're effectively a grammatical aspect of a sentence. Later in Dresner and Herring, 2010, so their seminal work, they looked at how emoticons are indicators of a text illocutionary force, so the intended meaning of a sentence. Two then looked at emoticons as compensatory markers of a social context, and this is really interesting given the last year in the COVID situation, having lack of a social context online, how emoticons have been used as paralinguistic tools to show when there is lack of a body language or other indicators. And then Van der Grift 2013 looked at how emoticons had been used in peer review, so as a humorous form of politeness strategy for avoidance of disagreement. So how students negotiated constructive feedback using emoticons and avoiding offence online. So let's look at the existing literature regarding emoticon usage in computer-mediated communication and also in assignment feedback. So in 2001, and McKinney and Roberts in 2004 looked at how they helped to build online digital communities in an online course. Crone in 2004 looked at the significant difference of opinion amongst different age groups, finding that there was a tendency amongst older people to not to accept emoticon usage, with younger people being slightly more accepting of that usage in CMC. Controversially, now that study seems to indicate that view is a bit out of date. And that older and younger generations negotiate a new emoticon language together and co-construct that vocabulary together. So that's quite interesting. Rourke et al. And Garrison, Anderson and Archer look at how emoticons can be used to improve a feeling of social presence online, so in their community of inquiry model, and how they can be used as a gauge of effective or emotional expression. Forsyth and Johnson in 2017 looked at the two most important aspects of receiving feedback to be accessibility and the emotional aspect of receiving feedback. So these are two beliefs that really resonate with me, particularly the emotional aspect of receiving feedback. So I think we've got to be really careful of that and the person receiving the feedback, so they engage with it and they react positively to that feedback. So accessibility meaning how practically students can actually access that feedback. Moffitt, Padgett and Grieve in 2020 looked at how instructors can use positively valenced emoticons to inject fun, warmth and emotionality into written feedback online feedback rather, without sacrificing the quality or the professional integrity of the feedback. And lastly, something I'm going to talk about in more detail later is Doiron in 2018 and also in 2016. He co-constructed a glossary of emoticons with his learners, and then the learners used those emoticons in peer review tasks. The four main research questions in the study relate to is it appropriate for university tutors to use emoticons in written assignment feedback? That was the central question. And if so, what might be some implications for the use of emoticons in pedagogic feedback? So in terms of the HE environment, where do we go next with this? Third one was, does the presence of emoticons in individual written assignment feedback comments have an effect on how the tutor feedback comments are understood by the feedback recipient? And the fourth one is, what is the very nature of the relationship between written feedback and emoticons? So in terms of the research methodology, I used a mixed methods approach, obtaining quantitative data and qualitative data. My sample group was 18 students, so fairly small sample group in total. I was intending for it to be slightly larger, but due to it being quite a busy time in the term, I didn't quite get the number of responses back that I had wished for. In terms of the setup of the study, so I created a fake student essay and then inserted feedback comments and commented on that essay using feedback comments with emoticons, which I sent to one half of the students, and then it contained feedback comments without emoticons, which I sent to a different group of students, as I wanted to compare and contrast the responses. The students were then sent a SurveyMonkey questionnaire of approximately 10 questions. So they were asked questions about how they felt about the appropriacy of emoticon usage, marker perception, marking quality, marking integrity, and a few other questions relating to the nature of the feedback comments and the relationship between the feedback comments and the emoticons. In terms of the research participants, they came from the International Foundation Programme, undergraduate study, so credit-bearing in-sessional modules, and also postgraduate modules as well. So the students came from different age groups and subject disciplines. After being exposed to the essay and the assignment feedback with or without emoticons, I then asked 5 of the students to take part in a semi-structured guided conversation. So I specifically chose 5 students who had been exposed to emoticons and asked them in more quite a lengthy guided conversation, and asked them in more detail what they had thought about the feedback comments and the different emoticons that they'd seen in that feedback. So then the results were analysed using Searle's speech act theory. So thinking about analysing the intended illocutionary force of the comments and what students had said about that in the guided conversations, and then used Kress and Van Leeuwen's theory of multimodality. So looking at discourse, design, production and distribution. So thinking about those 4 elements as a lens through which to analyse the guided conversations as well. So I thought quite carefully about the different emoticons I wanted to use in the feedback comments, and in the end I chose 4. So I went for mostly positively valenced emoticons. So I adopted the smiley. So the intended meaning being to acknowledge good work in the student's submission, and something that should be reapplied and replicated in future work. I wanted to use the scratching chin face as well to encourage reflection and to communicate that something is unclear or unsure to the reader, and it needs the writer to rethink it. I used the academic face. I felt this one was very appropriate in an academic environment because students would be able to understand that symbol with the mortarboard. So that emoji was being used to say what was good academic practice and again what should be replicated. And I deliberately lastly chose quite a dialed up emoticon, the shocked face I've called this one, so to indicate what was surprising, shocking or controversial, and that the writer needs to rethink it. So I wanted particularly to see how students reacted to perhaps a more negatively valenced emoticon, as previous literature had talked about just use of positively valenced emoticons. The results of the study were positive. So a small majority of the students surveyed felt it was appropriate to use emoticons in feedback. So 10 out of the 18 students said that they felt it was appropriate, and that was surveying students from both the control group and those who had been exposed to emoticons. Where they felt it was particularly useful was in strengthening the feedback message, so dialing up that feedback message. They found it helped to reduce the transactional distance between teachers and learners. And that one thing I found particularly interesting was they enjoyed seeing positive teacher emotions about their own work. So that's kind of helping them to form a relationship with their students and reduce that transactional distance or that power distance relationship, which is naturally there in an HE environment. One student felt very strongly that the use of emoticons was inappropriate and had very strong feelings on that, and that they would completely disregard the feedback if they received emoticons in that feedback. So important to acknowledge that not all students reacted positively to the feedback. That was obviously just one student. In terms of the emoticons that they commented on in the guided conversation, so the smiley and the academic face, they said allowed them to understand what was done well in the writing. So they found that useful to know, to have that acknowledged, and also what they should replicate in their future work. The scratching chin face drew attention to the distinction between writer and reader, and also helped them to understand how to communicate meaning effectively. And one student said to actually remind him that there is a reader reading his work as well as him being a writer writing it. Also, some students commented that emoticons allow humour and lightness to come to teacher-student interactions, and the use of emoticons didn't compromise the integrity of the teacher or the professionalism, but it helped to reduce that transactional distance and the teacher-student boundaries. So this actually backed up previous results found by Moffitt, Padgett and Grieve in 2020. So what I can further see from the results of the study I did last year is it's unclear whether emoticons are helpful in just encouraging and motivating students to engage with feedback, or if they actually help students to understand the feedback comments themselves. So that fourth research question, understanding the nature of the relationship between emoticons and feedback comments, isn't yet clear. What is clear is that the students seem to say that they help them to engage with the feedback. One other point that came through quite clearly is when too many emoticons are used, it appeared to undermine the students' perception of the teacher, their professionalism. Some students reporting that they found emoticon use patronising or actually amusing at some stages as well, in more of a negative way. So let's have a think about these results and discuss them in more detail. So what this study seems to suggest is that emoticons are helpful in encouraging and motivating students to engage with their feedback comments. So that was exciting for me as a researcher, because that had been the original intention of the study, to get students to engage further by use of these emoticons and emojis. So this just a little bit after this dissertation was written, Padgett, Moffitt and Grieve, so in April of this year, they have suggested in their latest work that emoticons can enhance student perceptions of online feedback and also perceptions of the instructor without challenging the integrity of the feedback given. This builds upon the work of their study in 2020, which suggests that instructors can use positively valenced emotions to inject fun, warmth and emotionality into written online feedback, again without sacrificing that feedback quality or the professional integrity of the feedback giver. And this grew upon their previous work in 2019, which indicated that emotions and emoticon usage can change marker perception and make markers appear more extroverted and agreeable, as well as being more open to experience when the emoticons were included in credit-bearing assignment feedback. To conclude this part of the paper and the research study, so what the research shows is the power of emoticons to acknowledge positive student work and promote reflection on writing, so thinking about reader and writer. The ability to use positively valenced emotions in teacher feedback comments to reduce transactional distance and that power relationship between teachers and students. And it is an emerging field in computer-mediated communication and now in HE assignment feedback, suggesting that emoticons help to create a greater online social presence in a digital online environment. It helps students engage with feedback, and that importantly students enjoy seeing the emotions of their teachers in their assignment feedback. So I've left there a lovely quote from a student who gave this quote in the guided conversation. So what you can see there is it helps her to start that dialogue about her feedback and start that dialogic feedback loop because of the emoticons that she saw in her feedback. So now we've looked at the research, how can we as instructors use emoticons in feedback and in an online teaching session? So I've got 5 different areas to focus on here. So the first is encouraging reflection on writing and an understanding of what should be replicated about student work, so students do this in future. To understand student emotions about their work, which is really important in an online environment. To create a greater social presence and what Padgett, Moffitt and Grieve refer to as a sense of realness in an online setting. So students realise there's other students there and teachers there, and they are interacting as they would be in a real face-to-face session. To reduce transactional distance, and most importantly to add humour and lightness to teacher and student interactions, which I think is very important to students feeling like they can approach teachers regarding feedback. So practical ideas then that you can take away. So Romig in 2015 co-constructed an emoticon glossary with one of her classes in an HE environment. So here are some of the emoticons that she used to do that and the meanings that were co-constructed with the class. I particularly like that third emoticon down. So Doran did something similar in 2016, again looking at what positive work could be replicated going forward. So you can see here there's a real focus on looking at EAP type emoticons, so looking at bibliographic references, website hyperlinks, and particularly here critical thinking. So I wanted to share with you some ideas for emoticon usage, 3 ideas that I've been using with my students over the past year. Some of you may also have been using. So the first one is use of emoticons in chat messaging in online synchronous environments. So I've included here some of my students' favourite emoticons The penultimate one being quite interesting because initially I thought the student was using it here to indicate that they were cold and maybe their heating wasn't working in their student room, but they later said that this one for them meant embarrassment in the session, so that was quite interesting. So it helped me to understand instantly how they were feeling, and also sometimes for them to understand how he was feeling about their work as well. I used emoticons and emojis. I use those terms interchangeably here, but mainly I'm talking about emojis in email communication with students. So looking at encouraging students and helping them to feel motivated and inspired and to express positive emotions. And also we talked about use of memojis and avatars. So when students didn't feel comfortable with using a photo in their profile, how they could create a memoji or an avatar. Okay, so I hope this talk has helped us to realise the importance of using emoticons in assignment feedback and also in an online setting. The main ways being to reduce transactional distance, to increase those feelings of online social presence, and also most importantly for getting students to engage with feedback. I hope the latter part of the talk has given you some ideas in how to incorporate emoticons into feedback in the online setting as well. So thank you very much for listening, and I very much look forward to the Q&A session where we can discuss these themes further. Thank you.